Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and welcome to the Steadfast and Loyal program.
You gotta light 'em up before they burn it down. Better dig deep, put 'em in the ground. Blood on their hands, they're hellbound. Save us all. Ooh, they're gonna burn it down. Save us all before they burn it down.
Hey, greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the Steadfast and Loyal program. You know, when you hear about this DEI thing, I could not think of a better person to talk about where it is and, maybe its downfall than Bob Woodson, a great man, a great mentor of mine. He is the founder and president of the Woodson Center, the editor of Red, White, and Black Rescuing American History from Revisionists and Race Hustlers, and the author of Lessons from the Least of Us, the Woodson Principles. He just recently wrote an op-ed piece that you could find on National Review online called DEI Has Failed. It's time for something better. Mr. Woodson, sir, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleased to be here again, Alan.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on. Let's talk about this. I mean, it was just a couple of years ago, everyone was on fire. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now you write that it has failed and it's time for something better. So let's talk about the first part. How do you see it failing in this moment in time?
Well, first of all, it came into fashion after the killing of George Floyd,
hmm
and then and where we generalized about his killing, and somehow this is evidence of systemic racism and structural racism, and therefore, unless whites kind of fess up and contribute, then we can't find salvation.
Yeah.
And so this whole victims epidemic just swept the country, and it was a typical kind of race hustle, where we said to Black America that you don't have the capacity to be agents of your own uplift, and unless white people change, there's little you can do. And so we saw a proliferation of monies, corporations racing to identify and project all the problems being racial. And as a consequence, we saw, for instance, Ibram Kendi at Boston University received $48 million to do anti-racist research. And of course, we knew that was a hustle. Corporations spent $8 billion in DEI offices like commissars. The universities began to have DEI offices where everything was defined not by the content of your character, but the race of your skin. And as a consequence, we saw millions of dollars. University of Virginia had $20 million in DEI. One of the staffers made $500,000 in income. And so the question is, what did it produce? All it produced was disorganization and confusion and guilt and polarization. And so companies and people realized it had no consequence in terms of producing improved conditions for people, and that's why it's disintegrating. It's polarized us to the point where we're ignoring the real challenges facing our young people. It is the death from homicide, suicide, and prescription drugs affecting all races and all ethnicities. But yet we can't address these problems as long as we're looking at each other through the negative lens of race.
It's interesting because how did we get so, or how did some people get so bamboozled? Because all of a sudden you get this Marxist organization, Black Lives Matter, that is extorting money from these corporations. And of course, the three ladies that started, two of which said they're avowed Marxists, they're out there buying all of these homes and things of this nature. We even saw DEI programs creep into the United States military. I mean, You want to talk about diversity? I mean, the military has always been the leader in diversity, but it was always about your standards and your character. Equity was not about pushing away the standard, just to allow people to have the equality of outcomes. And yeah, we can be inclusive, but again, you got to meet the standard. How did people get so bamboozled? I mean, how did they get so beat upon the head? Because when you talk about these corporations, sir, you're talking about some pretty smart CEOs. I mean, how did they get the hoodwinked like this?
I think, Orlando Squires, my young colleague, I think framed it, but he said this whole narrative is being driven by elite guilty whites who are seeking absolution from injustices they never suffered,
Mhm,
and elite blacks who are, I mean the whites who are elite whites who are suffering crimes they never committed,
mhm,
and elite blacks who are suffering injustices they never suffered.
yeah.
And so they are the ones that are driving this narrative and ignoring the realities of what's happening in these inner city communities. I spend 80% of my time in low income communities, and the priorities that they express have nothing to do with what these elites are talking about. 80% of all low income blacks are not in support of defund the police, but
Yeah.
these elites are. And I spoke at the Air Force Academy 2 years ago. I didn't get invited back.
I can imagine.
Even the black leadership amazed me how much they are embracing this. How can you sell young men and young women to give up to your life in defense of a country that you're telling them is racist and forever flawed? How do you do that?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because the former chief of staff of the United States Air Force, who is now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, black four-star general Charles
I know
Brown,
him.
yeah, was the guy who said that I only think we need 46% white, pilots. I don't care what color you are up there. If I'm on the ground, as I was, I just want to know you can put a bomb where it's supposed to be. Or if I'm there with my parachute, I want to make sure that you can navigate and get me to the drop zone where I'm supposed to be. I mean,
Alan, I almost prefer old fashioned bigotry.
that'll
I,
be the quote of the day.
I really do, because at least you knew it was external.
Yes.
If I was flying with a guy who was from Alabama and I covered for him when he went away unauthorized, and he came back with tears in his eyes, I said, "Why did you do that?" Because in Alabama, I said, "I know what it was like in Alabama." This was in the 50s.
Hmm.
I said, "I did it because you needed help." Well, as a consequence of that act of kindness, man, he was changed. Because I think it's easier to change someone as a hard bigot because it's external. But unfortunately, what we're telling young blacks is your problem. You don't have the capacity to be agents of your own uplift.
Yeah,
To me, DEI is an embrace of white supremacy.
it is.
You're saying that you, as a black person, do not have the agency to be your ability to elevate yourself. That unless white people change, there's little you can do. That's a horrible message.
Wouldn't you call that the soft bigotry of low expectations?
It's even worse because you see, if you constantly tell young people, black and white, that they live in a country where if you're white, you're an oppressor, and if you're
Yeah.
black, you're a victim. After a while, these children begin to accept the notion that perhaps it's because they're unworthy. And if they feel unworthy, then they are going to devalue their life. And that's why they're inclined to either take their own or take someone else's.
Yeah.
And
Now,
that's why I think people are realizing, waking up to the fact that this message of gloom and doom and polarization is having a devastating effect on the attitudes of our young people. And that's why they're dying in record numbers.
no kidding. Now, so without a doubt, DEI has failed. But the second part in the title of your op-ed piece was "It's time for something better." What do you see as something better?
What is better is the challenge that we face. It is not racial. It is not economic. It's moral and spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
The recent Harvard study found that the leading cause of death of young blacks is homicide. Leading cause of poor whites in Appalachia is prescription drugs. It's so bad that they had to bring refrigerated trucks to accommodate the bodies. There are cemeteries in black communities in Philadelphia that are running out of space. And then a leading cause of death in Silicon Valley is suicide among teenagers. It's 6 times the national average. So what we've done at the Woodson Center, we have a group called Voices of Black Mothers United who lost kids to homicide. We reached out to the moms who lost children to homicide and prescription drugs in what they call a mother's consortium. We need to move race aside and let us come together and address the moral and spiritual free fall that is consuming our children and fill that emptiness that's in their souls to the point where they devalue life. It's only when we can come together and address the real crisis facing America that we can substitute or push race out the way. But Alan Patton, I think, said you don't take something from someone without replacing it with something of value. And that something of value is to reclaim the virtues and values of our founding principles as the only basis of restoration and redemption in America.
Well, it's a basic law of physics in that when you create a void, something's going to fill it. And I think that what we have seen is an abdication of the church from their rightful place as far as our moral and spiritual growth and development. I mean, I grew up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. My church was very important for that. I mean, youth choir, going off to summer vacation, Bible schools, and things of this nature. Can the church step back up to the plate?
The church has to, but the church has to really talk about ministry and the gospel, and not just filling pews or giving sermons. Kids don't want to hear any more sermons; they want to see a sermon.
There you go. You got it.
And so, therefore, the groups that I support around the country, they're small. 90% of my grassroots leaders are Christ-centered.
Good.
And that's where they're able to make a difference in the life.
Yep, that's that void that we've got to fill. Sir, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back after the break, we're going to talk to Bob Woodson about President Biden and his recent speeches this weekend at Morehouse College and at the NAACP dinner in Michigan. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey folks, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West here at Watchtower Firearms. This is the custom design AR-15 that was just made for me. It's got my Steadfast and Loyal logo there. On this side, you can see my signature, my master parachutist wings, of course, American flag. And I just want to tell you that you can't be a great American unless you have a great American weapon. And that's exactly what Watchtower Firearms is building. Great American weapons, all American parts, manufactured right here in the great state of Texas. And oh, by the way, let me see, where is the serial number on this one? TX 1836. If you're from Texas, I think you know what that means. God bless you. God bless Watchtower.
Hit, dead center. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Steadfast and Loyal program with our conversation with Bob Woodson. He is the founder and president of the Woodson Center. He just recently wrote an op-ed piece you can find at National Review online. DEI has failed. It's time for something better. But now let's talk about Joe Biden and his recent foray through the Black community, because we hear he's losing support there. And his speech that he gave at the commencement at Morehouse College, some place that I know very well because I'm from Atlanta. And also he spoke at a dinner for the NAACP in Michigan. Sir, is Joe Biden struggling with the Black community?
He is, but again, all he's peddling is fear.
Yeah.
If you don't, electing the other person is worse off than electing me.
Which we know is not true.
No, and that's what he's also. And he's pushing this. Someone once said that low expectation and the grievance worldview has trapped many blacks in an intellectual prison. And he's just feeding this intellectual prison that somehow our life is defined by what others do. So what is he offering? Free this and free that. As if the crisis facing Black America can be solved by giving us more government largesse.
We've been there, haven't we? Haven't we
Yes,
been there?
we've been there. It's when you contrast that even with the commencement speech that Obama gave. Obama said, speaking at Morse House, he said, being a man isn't the ability to have a child, but possess the courage to raise a child.
Mhm.
That's what he said, which was uplifting. Of course, he got castigated by Jesse Jackson and ripped apart by the civil rights community. And as a consequence, that was the last time he ever talked about personal responsibility.
Mm.
He joined with Biden and others in emphasizing forces that are in opposition to Black America, and they have a invested interest in keeping Blacks aggrieved, angry, resentful. Because you can't do anything, Alan, angry.
No.
You can't make love, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't vote right. And so it is important for people to, and I'm sure they see through that this patronizing speech, they're going to put y'all back in chains.
Yes.
There's different versions of that same thing. He's saying the same thing. They're going to put y'all back in chains, as if that the most important thing, phenomena facing Black America today somehow can be solved by what government can do for us, not what we are capable of doing for ourselves.
You know, it's interesting to me because here you have Joe Biden and his ilk. They're against educational freedom. And so basically, they have locked young Black kids into these failing schools in these inner city communities. And when he talked about the failure of what's happening in these Black communities, these are communities that have been run by, let's be honest, by Democrats for what, 50, 60 years? I mean, look
50 or
at
60
Baltimore.
years.
Look at Baltimore. I mean, you know, are we paying attention to what has happened because of the policies that he stands for?
We really are. In fact, I make the point that that in our work at the Woodson Center in our book Red, White, and Black, we were looking at that when whites were at their worst, we were at our best.
Mm.
In one of our studies, we looked at 5 Black high schools, one in New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and New Orleans. And Dunbar High School in New York, for instance, in D.C., for instance, had crumbling buildings, overcrowded classrooms, half the budget as white schools, and used textbooks. And at the turn of the century, Dunbar outscored every white high school in the city of Washington, D.C., as did all of the 4 other Black schools under those conditions. Today, less than 3% of the children in Dunbar can even read at grade level. And so how can you say that we were able to achieve academically at the turn of the century when racism was enshrined in law? We had no political representation, and we were in the depths of segregation, yet we were achieved because we had strong families. Elderly people could walk in those communities without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. Guns were not fired. Infants were not shot in their cribs the way they are today. So how can anybody claim race is the biggest barrier when under segregation there was not this hemorrhage of Black on Black death? More Blacks were killed in 1 year today than was killed in 40 years of the Klan.
Incredible.
And so how, again, I say when we have to examine when whites were at their worst, we were at our best. What is it that we did under conditions of de jure segregation that enabled us to thrive and to progress? And what we're trying to go back and look into that past to see if we can recapture some of what was happening then to apply it today. That's the challenge, Alan.
Yeah, and like I said, I grew up in Atlanta. I grew up in the old Fourth Ward neighborhood, Dr. King's neighborhood, and my elementary school, a little black Catholic school, was right there at Boulevard and Auburn Avenue intersection. And I remember walking down Auburn Avenue, going to the historic Butler Street YMCA, and I saw the small businesses. I saw the doctor's offices. I saw the lawyers' offices. And I was born in 1961. Hugh Spalding, where I was born, was a blacks-only hospital. Why is it that we don't see that same type of economic opportunity and development? And, again, Joe Biden comes out and talks about giving free stuff, but why isn't he talking about building up our economic opportunities to what it used to be, as you've articulated many times, at the turn of the century, or during some of the hard times of segregation?
The Wallahaji Hotel,
Yep.
Alonzo Herndon,
Yes. Herndon, I
who was
remember.
Herndon, who the Atlanta Life Insurance Company,
Mhm.
and became a barber and became a millionaire in Atlanta. In fact, years ago, I had a chance to be on PBS with Maynard Jackson when he was mayor,
Oh, what an incredible guy.
and I asked him, "Why are you redeveloping Peachtree Street instead of Sweet Auburn Avenue?"
Yeah.
And that's because the white business leaders were able to support these black politicians and their friends so that all of the development occurred in the white areas of Peachtree Street
Mhm.
and not Sweet Auburn Avenue. The Wallahaji Hotel used to be a big hotel in Atlanta. And so, but you see, they won't answer this question. Why did you choose in the 60s and 70s to concentrate on the restoration of white downtown Atlanta and not on Auburn Avenue?
No,
He
and
never
you
he
could,
never gave an answer to me.
well, he couldn't, and you could see the decline of Auburn Avenue, like you said. And here was a guy that went to Howard High School, that was right there in that community, in that neighborhood. Yeah, okay, so he did great things. Atlanta became an international city, but you're right. When you looked at Sweet Auburn, the cradle of the civil rights movement, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, Ebenezer Baptist Church, Big Bethel Church, Wheat Street Baptist Church, all of these historic churches, and you just saw a decline in that area. And so, coming back to Joe Biden speaking at Morehouse at their commencement address, he's talking about more free stuff. Why isn't he talking about better economic opportunities and development, which something President Trump talked about in the black community?
And what he doesn't realize, and people need to realize, that any group's participation in the American economy has nothing to do with what government gives them.
Hmm.
It depends upon their small business formation rates.
Hmm.
That any healthy community generates 2.5 businesses per 1,000 people per year. In the black community, the business formation rate is like 3 per 100,000 per year. But at the turn of the century, the black business formation rate was higher than whites. So we had a higher almost penetration rate when we were compelled to turn to our own businesses.
Yeah.
And so these are facts of history that we ignore. I grew up in an all-black, low-income community of Philadelphia, but I can tell you all the business owners to this day.
Yeah.
And they're gone today. They have been gentrified right out of that community. 19,000 blacks have been gentrified out of Washington over the last 20 years under black leadership, because all those areas that were black enterprise zones and whatnot are gone. They're gone.
You're right. Closing question. So when we watched Joe Biden give his speech just recently to the NAACP there in Michigan, is the NAACP a relevant organization, or is it just a political tool?
Then it has outlived its usefulness. The NAACP promotes the interests of gays and every other group above that of the black community. They are just totally irrelevant. When there was a referendum in New York and in Massachusetts on the issues of whether Catholic Charities, for instance, they were against placing children in same-sex homes because of their religious beliefs. The NAACP filed an amicus curiae brief in support of the LGBTQ community. And as a consequence, both they just gave up and closed, which meant thousands of Black children would now not find adoptive homes. So they chose the interests of the gay community over that of Black families.
Incredible.
So,
But-
I mean, you just got to look at the evidence when you don't know where does the NAACP stand on issues. You know, just look at what they're supporting. They're against choice in education.
Yeah, incredible.
Every issue that is important to low-income Blacks, the NAACP is on the side of white progressives. They have overtaken the organization.
Well, 4 white progressives founded the NAACP back at the turn of the century. They just happened to put W.B. Du Bois in charge as the face. So, Mr. Woodson, how can people follow you? How can people follow the Woodson Center and all the great work that you're doing?
Well, we can get woodsoncenter.org, or so you can get on our website. We have a book called Red, White, and Black: Saving America from Revisionist History and Race Hustlers. We've developed 35 lessons. School lessons have been downloaded 170,000 times over the last 3 years. The book was a bestseller. So just go on our website and learn about solutions. You'll just see an inspiring presentation of important lessons from the past, and hopefully we can draw upon lessons that we can apply to the future. But we'd love to hear from you and love to have your support.
Well, Mr. Woodson, thank you so much. And like I said, you've always been an incredible mentor to me. And if there's one person that represents the theme of steadfast and loyal, it is Bob Woodson. Sir, God bless you and take care.
Thank you, Alan.
Before they burn it down.